Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Chris Mosner, SVP with Ipsos Public Affairs. Chris, you have the floor.
Great, thank you, Megan. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I hope you are safe and well from wherever you're joining us. I'm located in Northern Virginia, and Jenny is out in Chicago area. Our team really is a national across the country team. Again, my name is Chris Mosner, and I'm the co-leader of Ipsos Polling and Thought Leadership Research Team. I spent more than 25 years of my career in helping companies and organizations identify insights about the public or stakeholder audiences and bring those findings to the light of day through client-led communications campaigns or by media coverage on cable TV, radio, TV news, and in the newspapers. Joining me today are two thought leadership experts. The first is Jenny Berg, an expert thought leadership researcher and storyteller on the Ipsos Polling and Thought Leadership team. And we're thrilled to have Katie Dennis from the Consumer Brand Association. She is really one of the best communicators in the Washington, D.C. Association sphere. And I've invited her to share some of her experiences here today. On our agenda, it's really quite straightforward. We're here to talk about a specialized form of communications research called thought leadership. First, I will take a bit of time to define and explain what thought leadership is and what it's not, but also to talk about the value of thought leadership to companies, associations, foundations, and nonprofits. Then Jenny will speak to a range of examples and storytelling types. And last, Katie will speak to her experiences bringing thought leadership into action. And then we'll, as Megan said a moment ago, we'll also answer a few questions at the end, but let's jump right in. So right there on the slide you have there, Cheryl, thank you. First question I'm often asked is, what do you mean by thought leadership, or how do you define thought leadership? And we can sum that up in three areas. First of all, as a rule, people are curious. They're curious about other people, about their hopes and dreams, their ideas, and we like to learn new things all the time. And the public and the press, they're that way too. And quite honestly, there is a need for fresh content regularly, particularly in the area of new insights on an issue or an idea, especially one that's both relevant and has impact on the community at large. Second, these new insights must be stitched together in a way that engage your audience to learn more about the issue. You have this new data to share. Be a storyteller. You are breaking new ground, so be creative and thought-provoking in the way that you deliver the results. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Third, every organization has a mission and goals, both business goals and communication goals. An effective way for companies to communicate to the public is by bringing new insights and ideas, not just new products. Driving the conversation in a way that brings both new insights or findings to the public and puts your organization's spin on it creates an insight that's actionable. It's all about shedding light and being forward-thinking, bringing new information to the public that they can use to improve their life or learn something new. Thank you, Cheryl. So to be a successful thought leader, it's really tied to specific goals and expected outcomes. Yes, you're bringing the new insight to the public, but you can also be the owner of these learnings. At Ipsos, we work with our clients to identify specific strategic goals and objectives that can be achieved through the research that offers the public at large new information relevant to their real life. Now, I'd like you to think of this in terms of, we'll call on the left side pillars, and on the right side return on investment, or ROI. Now, the pillars of thought leadership are how you connect an important public issue to your company or your organization's mission. So those 4 C's to the left: connect the business goals with the well-being and needs of the public. Second, claim your position as a socially responsible corporate citizen through new information and insights. Third, capitalize on earned media coverage to build your reputation. And fourth, create business opportunities to become a go-to trusted industry thought leader. Now, you can also measure your success as it delivers for your organization through these 4 ROI metrics to the right. When you're a thought leadership, you're establishing yourself in a new way as a thought leader. You're elevating your organization's profile in the community and with the broader public. Also, engaging your full range of stakeholders. That might mean reaching out or creating new partners on a key issue, keeping staunch allies on an issue together, or expressively reaching out to the public on an issue. And then last is the ROI of the best, right? Earning media coverage. The best thought leadership research can earn your organization prime media attention, often breaking through even those most hardened press officers to share that new finding. Cheryl, let's move to the next slide. So it's at this point where I also need to warn you that thought leadership research is not a marketing campaign in disguise. As the chart says, the press and the public can tell the difference between a well-meaning, public-minded information sharing versus a blatant, self-serving marketing effect. Don't overreach. Don't overreach and don't tell stories that don't make sense. Be smart. If you bring new, relevant, and useful information to the conversation, you will achieve your communications and business goals in the long run. Let's go to the next one, Cheryl, please. I think where Ipsos can offer the most help is in the development of the research and helping you think through what the stories are. We have a process that comes from a great deal of expertise and experience. First, we help you think through what the value proposition is of the research. What are the business and communication goals? We ask you lots of questions about your desired dream headlines and where you would like to see the information. Also, who are you trying to reach with these insights? Who are you trying to motivate to action in some form? Once those questions are answered, we get moving, working backwards from the desired headlines to create a series of questions that address these issues. Again, we're trying to help you break new ground and create new insights. A well-written questionnaire, one written with integrity and no bias, will generate interesting headlines and grab the media's attention. Write a questionnaire that is going to be interesting to constituencies and will bring or produce fresh insights with compelling storyline in mind. Include broad-ranging content to set the stage for multiple possibilities for delivering the type of insights that will achieve your business goals. Where possible, include some qualitative research to help tell the story. Pictures and videos help create an interesting story. And lastly, engage your PR agencies. Write an op-ed. Find a way to break through. Make sure that these insights generated can live on for a long time. Now let's move to the next slide here. So the Ipsos team, I said before, very experienced. The team has folks who've worked in the media, who've covered issues in the past. We have former journalists, campaign folks, managers, and we deal with the media every day as we are a polling partner with a number of well-known agencies as are listed below. So use our experience. Top-notch research methods such as questionnaire design and choosing appropriate samples is also key to telling the story and getting coverage. Some studies require larger sample sizes or over samples of specific groups of people. For instance, you might want to tell a story about urban renters or rural renters. Those who rent their apartment, we want to look at it by, say, gender or race and ethnicity, or are you in a city or a rural area? Knowing the types of people you want to understand helps us to determine what is the appropriate sample size and if oversamples are necessary. It may be important to tell stories with subgroups. Ipsos has both probability samples and opt-in sample sources that pass muster with a range of client types and media outlets. Let's move to the next, Cheryl. Now, one of the most important tools we have in our toolbox is the knowledge panel. The KP is the original, largest, and most established online probability-based panel in the US. It's well known to government, association, foundation, and nonprofit organizations, and the media trust the data that come from using it. So conducting a thought leadership study using KP will sow trust in the reader of the study. Let's move to the next. Last but certainly not least, a thought leader study is designed to allow you to tell stories and bring that data to life. We have a range of ways to spread the news. We do write excellent reports. I love them, 40 pages, 50, 100, we don't care. But we also have a slew of really talented data journalists and artists who help us tell the story through infographics and data visualizations, op-eds, and really, as you can see here on the bottom, a picture really is worth 1,000 words. We can co-author op-eds and opinion pieces to support your study. We also often do the work behind the scenes to make sure that the numbers that are in your press releases are correct and accurate. Now, sometimes thought leadership research needs to show change over time. So using longitudinal studies to track populations about their thoughts and behaviors are impactful too. As you can see on the right bottom, there's an item that says vignettes, and you can see data across a timeline. So using infographics, op-eds, vignettes, data visualization, all form important ways to communicate the data in effective ways. Again, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And these respondents who participate in these surveys, they need you to represent this data accurately and correctly while bringing that new idea to the table. So now let's turn this over to Jenny to talk about various ways to deliver these stories. Jenny.
Thanks, Chris. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Cheryl. We work with a number of clients across different industries, different types of companies. We work with, for example, .coms who often want to know things like, what are people doing? How are they behaving to help make real intelligent decisions about the future? We work with .org companies to take focus to a certain issue and to elevate it and really zone in on what's going on in society. We work with .govs and .edus to produce really reliable and in-depth data for them. So let's go in a little further on a couple of examples, starting with our How America Pays for College study that's over here on the right side of the screen. This is a study we've done with Sallie Mae for the past about 10 years, a little more than 10 years. It's their flagship research in which we interview current college students and parents of current college students to understand how they pay for college, how are they making decisions about college, and what is this current experience of college like for students. That was especially interesting in 2020. We did a few little add-ons to go back and find out more information as things changed throughout 2020 for college students. But that's an ongoing study. We've got another one coming out over the summer. In the last year, we did the data collection and consent survey with Publicis Sapient. This was a 5-country study in which we ultimately discovered that people are giving up their data to a lot of different sources, but they really have no idea what those companies do with the data after they've received it. So that was a very important finding for them to go back to go out and say, you're forcing people to give this, but they don't know what. So let's focus on why you're collecting this data, and that can help people to understand what's going on better. We work with groups like the CBA, which Katie's going to talk a little bit more about that, so I'll leave it open to her to talk more about how that is used. But I also Chris talked a lot about the public-facing research, and that is the majority of the thought leadership we do. We also have some studies that are not focused on the public, but instead focused on our company's clients and customers. So, for example, we work with a company who wanted to have a nice thought leadership piece for their agents to go to their customers and have something to talk about to them, something fresh and interesting for them. So it's a really wide variety of different uses for this type of research, but it's really an exciting form of research and something we're really proud to produce. Cheryl, let's go to the next slide. So we're advocates for our data and our insights. We're there, as Chris said, we're helping you build this research. We're helping you find those insights, find those aha moments to really push out and package the data up for the public and for your audience. But we also go beyond that. We're there on the back end after you've produced the data, the reporting. We have a voice in the media. We're out in the media producing op-eds, doing interviews, whether it's TV, radio, written interviews. We're really out there. All the examples you see on the screen are politically facing, but that's kind of where we're at right now. That's not the only thing we do. We do a lot more interviews than that. But it really shows you we have cultivated our reputation as a strong, reliable research company, and that can be a real asset to you as well. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Katie, who is the VP of Research and Narrative at Consumer Brands Association, to talk a little more about what this looks like in action and how it's used on the, from the next side of things. So Katie, please take it away.
Thank you, Jenny. So the Consumer Brands Association it represents the industry whose products you depend on every single day. We cover more than 1,700 iconic brands from companies like Clorox and P&G, General Mills, Coca-Cola. The average American actually uses 42 products from our industry every day. And as I get older and my skincare regimen gets more intense, I would say that I'm above average. All things we learn through survey research. So if we want to go ahead to the next slide. My fundamental belief is that behind every number is a story, and it's the story that gives that number real power. So that can range from things that change your thinking, shape your hearts and minds, or in the case of this chart, veer into a little bit of the absurd, or we'll call it memorable. So for this question, we were asking people, based on a number of things about recycling, what do you find more confusing, recycling or? And what we found is people found recycling was more confusing than building IKEA furniture, doing their taxes, playing the stock market, understanding the opposite sex. Only 4% said it's not confusing. So that alone was something that we knew would stick in the minds of our target audience. You know, when you're talking to legislators at the state level or the federal level, they hear stuff all day long, and you want to make sure that the one thing you have a chance to say to them is going to stick with them. And like, frankly, building IKEA furniture is that common experience that we all know is really difficult. We want to go to the next slide. Which brings me to the fact that polling should reveal at its best a shared human experience. The degree that you can tap into that, the more successful your messaging will be. We're on a webinar right now, largely because of COVID. I mean, we could still do it as a webinar at any time, but maybe this would be in person otherwise. And, you know, I think there's something that we've gone through this generation-defining shared experience. I think we can all remember back to March and April when we saw empty grocery shelves of some of the most high demand items, whether it was hand sanitizer, Clorox wipes, flour, because the whole sourdough phenomenon took off. I mean, there were things that we very much recall, and that fear. A lot of that was driven by panic buying and people saying, I got to get this, I need to have it. The psychology of empty shelves is very powerful. But one of the things, as we have been working to build a case to prioritize our workforce for the vaccine, has been the real threat for shortages is not having the workers to make the stuff that we need. So going and tapping into people, did you experience some shortages? Are you concerned about shortages? And are you stocking up? This kind of built the case that, one, people are still afraid that they're not going to have the things they need. That, yeah, a lot of people are stocking up, not everyone, but a lot of people are. And there's general concern about that. So the one thing we can do to mitigate this shared human fear that we all have is make sure that we have the workforce available to produce those things. You know, Clorox has been shipping 1 million packages of wipes a day. if they have a day off that because they have a plant shut down, that impacts not just consumers, but also hospital systems, schools, things like that that are depending upon these things being made. So it helped us make the case to, first of all, the federal government, and now in the states as the programs are actually rolling out. We can go ahead to the next slide too. I want to take a second to go back to my role before consumer brands and talk about carrying messages with the media. With the vaccine issue and all of the product issues, like we've certainly had something that resonates with the media in a little bit more of a scary way, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about something that was much more proactive in nature. So in my previous life, I worked for the US Travel Association and ran a campaign called Project Time Off, which was aimed at getting Americans to take all their vacation days. Hard sell, right? Like really, really tough. So we used survey questions that would basically help us make an economic and a social argument. You can go ahead to the next slide. First, we used a big, scary number. So this is 658 million vacation days that went unused in a single year. I will admit to you, I didn't steal all of my files from my last job, so I didn't have the most up-to-date slides, but spoiler alert, it's gotten worse. Every year we measure it, it seemed like there were more and more unused vacation days. And that's just kind of the culture we have. So what we did was we took this big number that we got in part through survey, because we asked people questions about their behavior. Did they forfeit days? Did they roll them over? What was the pattern? And then we turned that over to the economics experts who turned that into the actual big shocking number that certainly resonated with media, but really overstressed workers everywhere. And that's one of those shared human experiences. If you're not the worker themselves, you're probably the family of one or the friend of one who understands exactly what it means. So if you go to the next slide, we looked at this from a couple of different ways. One of the first ways was personal. I think we all know when we don't take time off, when we don't do the things that we need to connect with our family and friends, we're missing out on something. So we tapped into that and found that, you know, really kids think quality time is vacation time. Quality time is not when you're running from soccer practice to here, well, pre-COVID, running from school to soccer practice and trying to get a conversation in edgewise with your child. That's not going to be it. If my child interrupts this webinar, that's not quality time with her either. So we took that data point and then we brought in some family therapists to weigh in and bring their perspective to the numbers on what they're seeing and some of the ramifications of that. And that stuff is obviously really powerful. Guilt is a powerful motivator. We should never undersell it. But we also looked at the professional impact. And if you want to go to the next slide. This is where we really struck a chord. In focus groups, and Chris will probably remember this too, we heard this guy say, we're all work martyrs and no one can do the job as well as I can. And that was, bam, that was it, right there. That's where we dug in and we took that work martyr term and leveraged that to the hilt. I mean, if we had to pay royalties to this guy for the term, we'd be in real trouble. We would have run out of money immediately. But we continue to do new studies exploring the value of taking time off and found that it was something not only employees wanted, obviously, it was something that drove their success. There was a direct correlation between productivity and retention. And this was a hugely successful message for the media, both earned coverage we did really well with and op-eds. I wrote one for Harvard Business Review, for CNN. This was something that they were really looking for, particularly in the summer. And I would say that is one tip. When you're thinking about release timing, we actually did one big survey a year, one, and carved out multiple reports from it. Now we had to do a big sample size, so it wasn't, it wasn't free, but we got a ton of value out of it, and we timed it at the time that we knew media would be looking for things. So summer travel stories, midsummer, all the different things, spring break, like there were moments in the calendar we looked for, knowing that it would resonate more at those times. If you want to go on to the next slide. So we had to leverage our takeaways in a number of different ways. First and foremost was absolutely media. I would love to tell you that we were just incredibly artful and brilliant people, but in all honesty, we kind of lucked out. We did an interview with Time magazine and landed on the cover. And that was a running start into a lot of other coverage. And I am a stickler on methodology, and this is where Ipsos really shines. I don't want to give media any excuses to dismiss the findings or not pay attention to what we're saying. And this is where a strong methodology can make all the difference. And we never had an issue with the data we used. I actually bagged my white whale in Good Morning America, who is notoriously difficult about methodology. So that's how you know you've got something that can hold water. We also went big with sample, like I mentioned, so we could do state rankings. State rankings are always fun. People like that kind of personalized version of data. It's not always possible, but if you can, it's definitely something that we used a lot to see who was the best and worst at taking vacation. We also took one little data point about how planners, you look at the crosstabs of the data. Planners were more successful at work. They reported getting promoted more often, and they were also more likely to use their vacation time. So we turned that into a national day called National Plan for Vacation Day, which is the last Tuesday of January. It's actually this week. So if you haven't planned your vacation, it's not too late. I understand it's an awkward time, but planning it, there's all sorts of value from it. So I hope you derive the value from planning what's next after hopefully all this lockdown is over. And then I think the other big thing is, well, we didn't have deep pockets. We were a trade association. We had a small budget. We couldn't do a big ad campaign. We didn't have a checkoff like Got Milk. What we were able to do, though, is work with a few different agencies and partners that helped us leverage the message. So we consulted on a number of ad campaigns and really helped to shape some fascinating work, including an ad you might remember from MasterCard. We're going to play the video, but one quick note, you will have to turn up your computer volume to hear the audio. So can we go ahead and roll that?
We've heard that over 400 million vacation days go unused every year.
That's the stupidest thing I ever heard.
They're paid vacation days.
If you guys agree to travel more, we'll all do better in school.
We'll have a better understanding of other cultures. I will learn to parler français.
Oui, oui.
We're not asking for much. We just want one more day.
One more day.
For help planning your one more day, contact MasterCard Concierge Services or download our new app.
Because one more day is priceless.
So the thing about that ad that I absolutely love, I mean, first of all, kids in guilt, perfect. But they took a couple data points and turned that into a full campaign. You heard the big number about unused days at the top of it, but the one more day call to action was a direct result of the research work that we did to figure out that people needed a modest ask. You can't say take all your vacation days. You can't say, dive in with everything you have, you've earned it, use it. That doesn't really work. People need a modest ask to be able to break out of what scares them about leaving the workplace. There is this work martyr philosophy, and you have to understand that that's the playing field, and you have to make sure that your call to action is reasonable. And that's where One More Day came from, because they wanted to do this big ask at first, and we kind of pulled it back and said, nope, that's not going to be effective. You really need to make the ask marginal enough that people can be successful and feel successful in doing it. And that's kind of where that came from. So it was just a bunch of little data points that we turned into much, much bigger things and saw tremendous success, both from a media perspective and what we were able to leverage with outside partners. And
Katie, can I ask you a question there at the back end before we go into the actual questions?
Sure.
So I know the answer to this question, but you went into this, all of this research with some ideas in mind and some questions in mind. Did you know the answers before you asked the questions, or were there some surprises and some new things that came to light that provided insights for your agency?
I would say to a degree we knew some of the answers, right? One of the exercises I'd always recommend is write out the headlines that you want to see coming out of this and start there and work backward. You want to make sure that if you're doing a study, you're getting something usable out of it that's going to support your narrative. But I think you want to leave a little room to be surprised, because some of the best stuff can come in the surprises. Chris, as you know, I'm a big fan of digging into those crosstabs and figuring out what the different populations are saying. We've had very big success with looking at generational issues, gender issues. I would always say those are worth a pass, and that's where some of the surprises can be found. The other thing is the One More Day thing surprised me, but I would, if you can swing it and your budget allows for it, focus groups are a really great way to frame your thinking. And I mean, the work martyr example is by far my favorite. But with consumer brands, we did some about trust and trust in our companies and some of the issues there. And having an understanding of the foundation and the ground that you're playing on really informs a much stronger survey whenever it's possible.
Excellent, thank you. So let me bring Jenny and Cheryl back into the picture here. I know I'm seeing a couple questions come in. Cheryl, can you manage those for us real quick?
Yes, can you hear me? There
Yep.
is one that says, how exactly do you think through the right methodology, sample, and N sizes for a study?
Sure. I'm gonna take that and throw it to Katie afterwards. One of the things that we look at, as Katie said before, is working with what you want the headlines to be and work backwards. But that also means that you have to be thinking about which audiences you're hoping to find an insight from. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes that means larger sample sizes or oversamples within specific groups. Maybe it's race, ethnicity, maybe it's an age group. We hear a lot from clients about, tell me the difference between millennials and Gen Z, or the older generations, et cetera, which I'm part of. But it's all about thinking through the headlines and the subgroups to be able to get there. Yes, a national sample of 1,000 is a great place to start to create a kind of a national point of view. But if you want to start talking about, 18 to 24-year-olds versus Gen Z just above them, you need some additional oversamples to get there.
Yeah, I think I put Chris through the ringer on sample size many times by saying, well, I want people who are over 18 who receive paid time off as part of their job, and then I want, a minimum sample for all of the 50 states, including Alaska, which is a real fun one to get. So doesn't really have the population that makes that easy. Now, that was something where, again, we did one big survey. So we knew we were going to slice and dice that a number of different ways, and that was an efficient way of using the budget we had. I don't necessarily have that at Consumer Brands Association, where we have a much bigger issue portfolio that we're going after. So we have to be more mindful that we might not be able to do a big sample size. But, if we're doing something where we know we've got 5 target states, we might do an oversample in those states so that we can draw conclusions where we need messages and where we need to advocate most specifically.
And your point earlier, Katie, and I mentioned it in one of my slides, adding qualitative to quantitative research really brings those insights out. And I remember those focus groups. I was in there in Chicago. That guy was right over there to my right. And he was really quiet for about a third of the group, and then erupted with this new insight that completely changed how we ask questions the rest of the group. So adding qualitative adds a level of story to an insight that is invaluable. Cheryl, what else do you have?
There's another one that says, where do you start? How do you figure out what questions to ask?
Headlines first. What do you want? What are you hoping to say? You start there, and then you work backwards. And I would also say, and Katie would back me up on this, is that asking one question about an issue doesn't solve it. You need to go at it from a couple different ways so that you combine a couple questions to create a larger insight. That not one insight is not just hanging on one number. Really needs to be a combination of numbers that allow you to show where, directionally where things are happening.
Yeah, I would say that I probably use, on a good survey, 50% of the questions will surface into the report that we write. Now, I don't write 40-page reports. I'm a 10-page kind of gal. So maybe if you're writing something longer, it'd be different. But I do think that you just have to be prepared that not everything's going to meet it. So ask it a few different ways, because you want to make sure that you're getting that result.
Yeah, I would also add to think about one more thing to add. When you think about what you want to do, think about what's new. So what you don't want to talk about the same thing everyone else is talking about. Where can you stand out? So thinking through what's important to your company, what's important to your goals for the future, and that's where a good thought leadership can really elevate where you're going.
And let me add to that, Jenny. So you're talking about research on research. So we're working with a client right now on a particular issue, and they have a point of view on what they want to say, but we had to check to see if other people were saying it and if they were pulling in other numbers to be able to do so. So again, you want to create new questions, a new angle on something to be able to, even if you're talking about an old issue, you need to create a new and relevant number to be able to create a new insight. Go ahead, Cheryl. What's the last question?
This last question is for Katie. How did you go about for that study, the ratio of questions that you used for the headlines and the storytelling when you were designing the study?
I'm sorry, what in storytelling? What was the first part?
The headlines and storytelling.
I guess I see them as the same. I think that your headline is your story and you want to drive that as much as possible. To the degree that you're going to be successful, kind of going back into some of the point of the previous question, I do not believe in doing research in search of an agenda or a platform. That is, in my opinion, never really a great idea. If you're doing that, you should be doing focus groups. If you're still trying to feel out what your message is, that's where you should be living. If you are doing survey research, you want to make sure that your questions are clear. And I think that's something that, you know, it's a process and it's an iterative process, one that I know I've worked with Chris and Jenny through several times. It's like, this is what we're trying to get at. I don't know how to say it. Can you help me say it? But I think that's kind of where you want to make sure that you're not using research to define your agenda. What is the thing you're starting with? So for, you know, one of the studies we did last year was, if plastic usage is up because of the pandemic, what does that mean for the importance of recycling? Because one of our major issues is we want to fix the American recycling system, which is a mess. So, you know, that's our primary contention. We want to go after the fact that, like, there is a consumer case to build for the saving recycling, and that it needs to happen, and that it's a priority regardless of, and actually because of, the pandemic. And what we found is that people actually wanted to double down on recycling because they were a lot less concerned about an increase in plastic waste, because, you know, the increase in plastic waste was because of masks and gloves and things like that we're just using now. So maybe that was the surprise in the findings, was how much more important people found recycling, but it all kind of laddered into that central point of view that we need to fix the American recycling system.
Yep. And before we sign off, Cheryl, I just wanted to sum up what I think Katie just said. Create fresh content, make it insightful, relevant, impactful, engage your target audiences with great storytelling, be thought-provoking, make sure it's mission critical to your organization. And then lastly, drive that conversation. Find a distinctive point of view. Be authoritative, be forward-looking. As Katie said, you're not going to solve recycling in one moment, but you got to find a way to get in and start having that conversation. So fresh content, engaging storytelling, and driving a conversation are really the pillars of success with thought leadership. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in through me, Cheryl. Can't see it with you either.
That was it. That was that last one.
So with that, let me first thank Cheryl and Jenny for working so hard to get this webinar on the air here. And a huge thanks to Katie Dennis for her expert ideas in terms of the issue. Thank you all for joining today. And with that, I think I will pass it back to Megan to close us down.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, ladies. Appreciate it. Today's presentation was very interesting. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If we didn't get to your question, then we will do so by email. You will also receive an email with a direct link to today's recorded presentation. Additionally, you can reference the handout section in your event console for more about the research we shared today. And of course, we welcome the opportunity to speak with you, so please feel free to reach out to us. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.